Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Marketing Podcast. I am John, your host, and I am so excited to help you get marketing in the digital space. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and drop us a like after you share the episode. I am so excited today to be with my good friend, Paulo Simoes with Brios Media. Paulo, great to have you on board today.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's always so exciting to talk with someone who has had such an interesting background and career. Paulo is a video producer and marketer who helps other marketing, sales, and HR executives showcase their services and culture more effectively with magnetic videos that attract, engage, and convert. So Paulo, I know the audience is going to be really excited to hear how we do this and how you do this and then where you can actually deliver this media. But of course, as people know who listen to me here on the show, I always like to find some interesting fact about one of our guests. And Paulo, you and I have known each other for quite some time. I know there's probably some interesting stories you could share. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and something interesting that maybe they didn't know when they tuned in today?
Sure, it's a pleasure. And John, I always tell you this, my conversations with you are always stimulating, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Originally from Brazil, I was born and raised in Brazil, and I came to the US when I was a junior in high school. So maybe something interesting is my international experience. I lived in 6 different countries and I speak 4 different languages. And I hope I'm not sounding bashful by saying that. But I was just, lucky to tag along my parents, what they were doing at that time. And I was crazy enough to take some chances in my career. Ended up in some beautiful places like Puerto Rico, Italy, Spain. And so I had a really great experience working in the movie industry as well. So I met some interesting people and worked with some phenomenal marketers, and that's pretty much where I learned most of what I know today.
Well, as you said, our conversations are always stimulating and exciting. And I think the international experience and the fact that you mentioned that you speak 4 languages, what I find fascinating is that video, even without having, let's say, a specific script, is a universal communication language where we can tell stories more effectively, and that stimulates each area of how we consume media, whether that's visual, audio, or in some ways also showing rather than, telling. Video allows you to do that. So I think it's so cool, and obviously, we could probably have a whole episode just on the number of celebrities that you've met in your life. But this concept of storytelling and language, I think, really connects to what's important to me at Blue Comet and our audience, but also to, I think, why you started and why you've been working with Brios Media. So tell the audience a little bit about Brios and this mission you have for professionals to tell stories more effectively online.
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. And I would say, as far as storytelling, we as human beings, we grew up with stories, right? If you think about the beginning of society as we know, the caveman, how many times we've seen, cavemen doing the little drawings in the cave on how they gather, how they hunted. And so we grew up with that. And as human beings, everything we learned initially was by stories and in books. And so we were wired that way. We just learn better. And that's part of our life experience in general. Think about books, think about theater, musicals, movies, commercials, miniseries. Everything is about storytelling. And then
Absolutely.
when it comes to business, it's no different. And I think those companies that are telling their stories more effectively are the ones winning. They need to have a good product or a good service, but sometimes we see that even mediocre products or services do better than even great products. It's all about
Right.
storytelling and being able to connect with your audience with the right message and speaking the language they can relate to, that's magic.
I think that's such a great position for a conversation today, because I think as the marketing sphere has progressed, no longer is it just, let's say, major distribution channels that allow for great storytelling. I mean, who doesn't love an ESPN 30 for 30, or watching a documentary somewhere, or learning someone's background and story online from a major provider? But especially with what Brios has been focusing on specifically for delivery channels like LinkedIn and other places where professionals meet and engage, this is where we now have kind of the democratized opportunity to tell those stories more effectively and focus on areas of our business or of our personal and professional lives that maybe we didn't have that ability, let's say, even 5 to 7 years ago. So, could you tell the audience a little bit more about those magnetic videos that you create specifically for these marketing and HR and sales professionals, and why that might be important and they should consider using these channels like LinkedIn to reach and engage more effectively with their potential customers and clients online?
Sure, those are great points, but great questions. So maybe going back to when I left Sony, I worked for Universal and then Sony Picture for almost 20 years, overseas most of that time. And when I left Sony 11 years ago, um, I guess I wasn't smart enough to know where we would be today as far as video, but I knew that I could use my storytelling, marketing background of marketing films in theaters, and my background in film and video making to help organizations, businesses that couldn't understand the power of video. Like you said, years ago, it was just for the Fortune 500 companies that could spend millions of dollars in production and TV commercials. And social media has changed all of that because it has made video available to everyone.
Of course.
It doesn't mean that every video is good, and it doesn't mean that every platform is the right one for you. But again, going back to knowing who you are, what your product is, and who your audience is, and being able to connect those three and tell stories effectively, those are magic. That's what marketing is all about. So I decided to cater to people that were not looking at video as a means to tell their stories, to communicate more effectively their three W's: who you are, what you do, what makes you unique. And
Right.
so we started to work with different businesses, small businesses initially, and from then we progressed and got bigger clients. And so we focus mainly on helping our clients solve difficult communication issues, whether those are
Hmm.
internal or external, through video.
That's really interesting, and I think this is a very fascinating concept in the sense that obviously there's always the kind of initial phase of thinking that we need to market externally, right? And find new clients or find new potential customers or reach an audience we haven't reached before. But something that you've mentioned to me, which is even I would say as effective or necessary to keep your company in a position where it's moving forward, is to message effectively internally. Maybe take a look at your current HR manual or your current training practices, that you use to keep your services and operations running. Is that some place that you find clients have the opportunity to add a visual layer with a set of training videos or pieces of media that might be effective for not just the external potential of new clients, but also the internal of supporting your team?
Absolutely, John. In fact, we right now we're working on a project with a local client, and they are basically rolling out a performance review plan
Hmm.
towards the end of the year, where they're in, implementing with all their managers and all the employees, about 1,200 of them, how the company is going to measure their performance based on what, And so people would know how to have conversations with their bosses and have more clear expectations of what they have done this year, in the future, and that's going to affect promotion, salaries, and things like that. So that's just one example of how a company is using video to do that. And they would not be able to do that without video because they have different branches in different parts of the state. They could not travel with their leadership team and do that 20 times. And the problem is that when you have different people doing that, the message is not going to be the same, right?
Sure.
It's the old story. If you use that little phone cup that you speak and somebody will hear the message and pass it on, it's going to be distorted by the time it gets to the end. And
The
so
old
they're
telephone.
able, yeah, so they're able to have consistent messaging, and they're able to also talk about values, company values, core values, and a lot of things that sometimes are not passed through from the top to the bottom. And so there's so many benefits into that. And if I go back to during the pandemic, we did some training for another company that could not do in-presence training, and it was the same thing. It was about consistent messaging, and they ended up having training that was scalable. They could train people out of state, and the secondary benefit that they weren't even planning on this. We looked at some numbers. They were spending about $100,000 a year in training, and they figure out that they're going to invest based on what they invested. They're going to save about $1 million in the next four
Wow.
to 5 years just by implementing this video training, because it was taken away from employees and travel and bringing people in and hotels and meals and all that. So video training, whether it's for sales, onboarding, recruiting, is just phenomenal, and it's taking off. We're seeing a lot of that. A lot of people using that. Another area that we're really focusing on is HR, as far as recruiting as well, and
Sure.
that's another whole area that we could talk about.
That's really interesting that by creating, let's say, this one piece of potential evergreen content or kind of putting that work in up front, you, like you mentioned, would be able to save a tremendous amount of money in, like you mentioned, not necessarily having to bring individuals to a central location, maybe with, other challenges like some of the health concerns we've seen with people meeting in large places, that you can have people to engage and watch at their own time and speed, but that the message is unified and effective and doesn't change. And that's a really interesting and I think valuable piece of producing video, is that if you're able to have that vision of what you want to create, you can actually create a piece of content that can have a much, much longer life. I mean, even think of turnover in business, right? If someone were to move on who had, let's say, the keys to an idea or a system or process, if you document that, especially documenting it visually, then you would have a huge ability to have that transfer, let's say, in case an employee moved on, or the system changed, or the way you needed to deliver that changed, you would have that video remain. So maybe that's something that you could share a little bit with the audience, is how to define that vision and what types of videos might be worth it to create. Like you mentioned, recruiting videos. What does that look like when you help a client understand how to deliver that message and those goals?
That's a great point. I think when we look at recruiting, and obviously the pandemic also had, it just turned things upside down for a lot of people. It's probably never going to go back to being the same. People are looking to work from home. They want to do hybrid work. And so it just created a lot of different sets of problems for companies. And what we're seeing, and there are a lot of studies on this, there are three major things that um, candidates are looking for. Obviously, they're looking for compensation. They want to have a
Mm-hmm.
career a lot of times. So those are important, but those only start the conversation. What we're learning is that people really care about who they work for. They want to work for a company that has a mission, and they want to make sure that their values align with those companies. So it's all about company culture, values, and mission. If you have a
Mm,
fit on those three
right.
areas, that allows candidates to have a better onboarding, a better understanding of who they're working for, and for them to stay longer. That brings more fulfillment to the worker. And statistics show that people that are fulfilled at their jobs, they stay 3 years longer than people that are not fulfilled. And we know
Right.
that turnover costs money to companies. It
Hmm.
costs a lot of money. Even hiring and onboarding costs a lot of money
Sure.
because you need to interview, you need to spend time, you need to train people, you need to get people into their systems. So all of that is time, all of that is money. So companies can hire a better fit, and companies that can reduce that turnover ratio are not only going to be more productive, but they're going to save money and put that back into their bottom line. So let me just give you one example of that. I was talking
Yeah.
to an HR director this afternoon. They hire about 100 people per month. Okay, it's a lot of people because they have a factory. And if we round numbers, they're spending about $5 million a year in recruiting and onboarding. Okay, these are the numbers because it costs about $4,200 per person for you to just recruit and onboard.
Wow.
And I was talking to this HR director, and he was trying to figure out if a video project would make sense, or what's the ROI on it. And I told him, imagine if you invest, and I just threw a number, let's say $50,000 on a project for you to onboard better. You would only have to improve 1% for you to make that project
Exactly.
viable. I said I would be out of business if I didn't help my clients improve more than 1% at whatever problem they have. And so,
Absolutely.
with that information, he said, let me talk to my bosses and get back to you because I think this is something we need to do.
Sure. Sure. No, that's a great point, and I think that's also, when we're helping clients understand the types of media to deliver, and Blue Comet Media is a media delivery agency. That's what we do, right? We use advertising channels to help people message effectively to their potential clients and customers. In addition, we've been encouraging many of our clients to explore video channels like Hulu, YouTube, and other streaming properties because that's where the eyeballs are. That's where people go to consume media. But of course, if you're going to use that channel and you're going to use that means of effectively reaching and spreading your message, you have to have the assets and you have to have the media to do that. So
Right.
obviously, from my perspective, I see the value. But again, like you said, the internal possibilities of how to improve your processes, even that 1 or 2% or 5 or 10 or 50%, can have such a long lasting impact for not only current, bottom line, but also revenue production in the future. So I think that's an excellent point for people to think through when they're looking to invest in any type of marketing activity. Consider not just the immediate effects and results of how does that drive $1 for me, let's say the day I turn on an advertising campaign. What process are you improving that gives you that percentage increase that you just mentioned, in terms of even if you improved 1%, does that give you the ability to have this massive company-wide impact, and especially with delivering media that we've mentioned. So Paulo, I do want to ask you, how are people leveraging LinkedIn as well with this concept of producing video? Because as we come to the end of our conversation today, I want to focus on an area that people can actually use for deliverability. How do people use what you produce and what we do to message effectively on a channel like LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, there are probably a lot of different ways you could use video on LinkedIn. I'll mention probably three that I think are really effective. Um, Number one, I would say sharing insights.
Hmm.
And that could be for example, snippets of this interview that we have, right? Maybe
Hmm.
it's a minute or a 2 minute or a 5 minute segment where you really share something that you know about your sector that will help other people
Right.
in the future. So it's basically, sharing insights. And in those cases, the videos obviously want to have, good quality, but they might not be, high end, super professional. And I suggest a lot of times that you do put subtitles underneath because people sometimes they'll start watching a video without audio. So it'll be nice for them to see what the subject is about. Maybe putting even on top, if you do a one by one, the title of the video, so people
Right.
it'll
Right.
catch attention. Um, Another one would be sharing a little bit of what you do, and I'll give you an example. We do work um, for a architecture firm, and they like to do case studies, and so they are
Mm.
sharing online on LinkedIn their case studies. And that's a great way for them to procure more
Right.
projects. And they even share that with potential new clients and say, "Hey, look what we did. How we designed this university, and that's a potential client." So sharing projects, sharing what you do, and a high level production of who you are, what you do, what makes you unique. Those are great videos. It could
Hmm.
be an about us. It could
Sure.
be a project. So there are a lot of different ways for you to share professional videos online. Those are great.
I
Um,
I
and then I
really,
would
yeah.
say a third way for you to share video is for you to teach. It's not so much on
Mm.
insights, but
Sure.
if you have a course or if you have a segment. I'll give you an example. I have a workshop that I put together on how people can be using videos to recruit and onboard more effectively. And then a portion of that teaching is a 3 minute segment where we have a professional narration and we actually show examples of what those videos look like. This is a recruiting video testimonial, and then show what that looks like. This is a pre-boarding video with a welcome message from the CEO or the owner. So we just basically show what those videos look like. So that's a 3 minute video that I'm sharing with people that are potentially could be inspired by those ideas, right? So
Sure.
I'm not necessarily selling what I do. I'm sharing knowledge, but if people are interested, they want to know more about it. So those are three ways you can use video very effectively in LinkedIn.
Well, Paulo, thank you so much for sharing that. I fully agree. I think that there is a huge opportunity for telling your story online, especially using a channel like LinkedIn. So I think it's important for business owners and companies and individuals to consider how they might use these types of channels and platforms for, like you said, insights, teaching, or engaging with new potential customers and clients by sharing that message and story. Paulo, thank you so much for being here today. I wonder if you could share a few key takeaways with the audience, and then you can let people know where they can find you on LinkedIn and online.
Sure, absolutely, John. I would say takeaways. I'll be very simple and I'll repeat maybe something that I already have mentioned earlier on. One thing we focus a lot on, and we have our own video production system, where we walk our clients through, the initial phase of finding out what your goals are. So vision clarity, and then creating the message, and then executing on the message. Part of that is the three W's that we talked about. So whenever you're creating video, focus on who you are, what you do, or your company, and what makes you unique. You need to focus on
Right.
those three things. That's number one. And then the other thing I would say, be yourself, and be real. I think people can be and are turned off by things sometimes that feel a little bit too made up. and don't feel genuine. So be genuine, be true to yourself, to your audience, and don't be afraid to share your knowledge, your ideas, and your expertise. I think those are probably the suggestions I have. Those are the basis for creating effective videos that will engage with your audience and will attract them. As you were saying, the magnetic power of video is that if you can attract your audience, engage them, you're going to be able to convert them if you have a good product or service.
Paulo, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. And I think that I would encourage everyone to take a look at their marketing strategy. Take a look at how you're presenting that visual message. What is your story? And obviously, if you need help with defining that and figuring that out, that's what Paulo and I are here for. So, Paulo, can you tell the audience where they might be able to get in touch with you? And of course, we'll have that information in the links section below.
Sure. I would say in LinkedIn, just look for me, Paulo Simoes, Brios Media, and contact me and send a connection request. And you can also find me through my website, Brios Media, BRIOS media.com. And just connect with me, and I'd love to have conversation with you.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Paulo. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. We always appreciate it. I hope you all learned some new things today. Remember to subscribe and share these episodes. If you loved our conversations and want to keep us caffeinated, there's always that Ko-Fi link where you can drop a few tips up for us. Of course, you'll see Paulo's information and, of course, the Blue Comet Media information in the link section below. If you have questions, check us out, comment, and connect. And I look forward to seeing you all get marketing in the digital space.